The storm outside was a quiet, patient thing, its rain tapping gently against the windows as though asking permission to come inside. I stood in the study, staring at the old oak desk that had once been Lily's sanctuary. For months since her death, I'd avoided this room, afraid that confronting it might rip open wounds I hadn't allowed to heal. But tonight, something drew me here. Perhaps a fragment of courage or foolishness sparked by the whispers I'd been feeling in the house, the presence I couldn't shake. The desk was as she'd left it, meticulously arranged, with her fountain pen resting neatly on its holder and the familiar scent of lavender clinging faintly to the air. My fingers hesitated over the top drawer before pulling it open. Inside, nestled among a few loose papers and dried flower petals, was a small key I'd never noticed before. The key seemed to hum against my palm as I slid it into the lock of the desk's lowest drawer. It fit perfectly, and the mechanism clicked open with a reluctant groan. Inside was a single, leather-bound journal, its cover worn and scuffed, as if it had been carried through many years and countless hands. I flipped it open, expecting to find the familiar sketches Lily used to doodle, or perhaps snippets of poetry she loved to jot down. Instead, I found hurried entries written in her precise, slanted hand. July 7th. The spiral appeared again today. I can feel it watching me. Every step closer to it feels like stepping out of time. They don't understand. It's not a place. It's something else entirely. The words sent a chill through me. My fingers trailed the ink like I could touch her thoughts, but they didn't feel like hers. Lily had always been grounded, practical. This sounded fractured, like someone standing on the edge of reason. Page after page described a place called the Spiral Clearing, a location that Lily said held a pull she couldn't explain. There were sketches too, spirals etched into the pages with almost obsessive precision. Some were tight and controlled, while others spiraled out chaotically as though her hand had trembled. I turned to the last entry. The ink here was darker, more deliberate, and the handwriting erratic. I found it. The clearing is real. I stepped into it today, just as they said in the stories. Time feels wrong there, like it loops in on itself. There's something waiting, something I can't describe. If I'm right, it explains everything. The disappearances, the losses. The clearing holds the truth about us. But now that I've been there, I think it won't let me go. I can't write more. They'll read this. The handwriting cut off abruptly, as if she'd been interrupted. The words coiled around my mind like the spirals on the page. My pulse quickened as I realized I had seen the clearing before, though not in real life. It was in a recurring dream I'd had for weeks after her funeral. A vast open field with a spiral of grass at its center, the edges wilting and browning as though drained of life. The room seemed colder now, the rain outside a dull roar as the storm picked up. I shut the journal and placed it back into the drawer, but I couldn't unsee the words. I couldn't unfeel their weight. Something about the clearing, about the spiral clearing, was calling me. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and gleaming under a pale gray sky. I clutched Lily's journal in my coat pocket as I drove through the winding country roads that bordered our home. The spiral clearing wasn't far, just over the next ridge, according to her meticulous notes. The drive was eerily quiet. No other cars passed me, and even the birds seemed absent. As the road narrowed and twisted, the trees on either side grew taller, their branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out the sunlight. Finally, I parked at a small turnout and began the walk down the trail Lily had described. My boots crunched against the gravel path, and the sound was the only thing keeping the stillness from swallowing me whole. The clearing came into view slowly, the trees parting like curtains to reveal an open expanse of tall grass. It was just as Lily had written, the spiral clearing. At the center was a perfect spiral of flattened grass, its edges unnaturally sharp and precise, as if cut by an invisible blade. The air here was thick, charged with something unseen but deeply felt. I stepped closer, my breathing shallow. As I approached the spiral, the hairs on my arms stood on end. It wasn't just a place, it was a presence. The space seemed to vibrate with a low hum, barely audible but unmistakable. The sky above darkened slightly, though no clouds had moved in. Shadows around the spiral seemed longer, stretching toward me like fingers reaching out. As I stood on the edge of the spiral, I thought I heard my name whispered faintly on the wind. "Lily," I called out instinctively, my voice trembling. The spiral's pull was magnetic, almost physical. I reached out, my foot inching toward the edge, when a sudden burst of cold air stopped me. The whisper came again, clearer this time. "Daniel." It wasn't Lily's voice. It wasn't even human. I stumbled back, my heart pounding, and for the first time, I noticed the faint impressions in the grass leading into the spiral. Footsteps. Too many footsteps, overlapping and leading toward the center, but none leading back out. The clearing wasn't a place to be discovered. It was a place meant to swallow you whole. I couldn't shake the image of the spiral clearing or the faint whisper of my name. That evening, I sat in the study, Lily's journal open before me, the pages now seeming alive with their secrets. I pored over every entry, dissecting her words like a desperate archaeologist piecing together a forgotten civilization. The farther I read, the more the puzzle of my family's history revealed itself, jagged and incomplete, but unmistakably sinister. My grandfather, Elias, had disappeared when I was a boy. He was an outdoorsman, a man who lived for the wilds, yet one afternoon he'd set off on a short hike and never returned. I'd always believed the story, an accident perhaps, or a fall into a ravine. But now I wondered, had he too been drawn to the spiral? Lily's notes mentioned Elias by name. Grandfather went missing, but no one talks about why. They know it's connected to the clearing. Every time someone goes missing, it starts with the spiral. It's like the clearing calls to us, especially the ones who dig too deep into its history. I felt it, the pull. It's so strong. The entries grew darker, more frantic. Lily's neat script became disjointed, her thoughts spiraling like the shapes she sketched obsessively. She wrote about dreams, about standing at the edge of the clearing while shadows moved in unnatural patterns, whispers growing louder each night. There were names, too. Names of family members I barely knew or had only heard in hushed tones at reunions. Each of them had vanished, no bodies ever found, their absences wrapped in a conspiracy of silence. I found a single loose page tucked into the back of the journal, creased and yellowed. It was a letter from Lily, addressed to me. "Daniel, if you're reading this, it means I didn't succeed. I thought I could break the loop, but the spiral doesn't work like that. It doesn't let go. It only tightens. Please don't follow it. If you step into that clearing, you might not come back. But if you do, the truth will change everything. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I thought I could protect you, but I was wrong. If you decide to go further, remember, nothing is as it seems. The spiral lies." Her words burrowed into me. I felt betrayed and heartbroken, but above all, I felt the undeniable pull to find out what she meant. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The walls felt too close, the silence too loud. I grabbed my coat and drove to my father's house, a small, cluttered bungalow on the outskirts of town. When I told him about the journal and the clearing, his face turned ashen. "You've been there?" he asked, his voice trembling. I nodded. "What aren't you telling me?" He hesitated, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "It's not a story you want to hear, son." "I need to know," I insisted. With a deep sigh, he began. The spiral clearing has always been there, long before our family settled here. Your grandfather used to warn me about it, told me to stay away. He said it wasn't just a place, it was alive, feeding off the people who found it. He told me stories about ancestors who disappeared one by one, always drawn back to that spot, no matter how far they ran. Why us? I asked. My father shook his head. Some families inherit wealth or land. Ours inherited the spiral. The dream came again that night, vivid and consuming. I stood at the edge of the clearing, the spiral of grass spinning impossibly fast, like a whirlpool pulling me inward. Shadows gathered at the edges of my vision, their forms fluid and shifting. My feet inched forward without my consent, the whispers rising to a fever pitch. I woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. My heart pounded as I stared at the ceiling, the dream's intensity leaving no doubt in my mind. It wasn't just a dream. Time had begun to unravel around me. Days blurred, and strange déjà vu moments left me questioning reality. I'd set my coffee mug on the table, only to find it a second later on the counter. Clocks ticked out of sync, their hands moving erratically. The world around me felt distorted, as though the clearing's influence had seeped into my life, unraveling the threads of normalcy. I returned to the clearing the next evening, unable to resist its pull. The spiral of grass seemed larger now, its edges more defined. I stood at its boundary, heart pounding, as the air shimmered faintly around me. The footsteps were still there, leading toward the center and nowhere else. This time I noticed something new, small, shimmering particles floating above the spiral, like embers caught in an unseen current. I reached out and my hand passed through them. A sudden jolt of cold shot up my arm, and for a moment I wasn't in the clearing anymore. I was somewhere vast and infinite, the spiral beneath me glowing, its edges lined with thousands of shadowy figures. They stood motionless, their faces obscured, their forms flickering like candle flames. Whispers roared in my ears, unintelligible but overwhelming, until one word cut through the noise. Choose. I stumbled backward, falling onto the grass as the vision dissolved. My heart raced as I scrambled to my feet, the clearing spinning around me. The pull was stronger now, almost unbearable. When I returned home, Lily's journal was waiting for me on the kitchen table. I had left it locked in the drawer, but now it lay open to a page I hadn't read before. The words, written in trembling script, chilled me to my core. The loop is closing. Time doesn't flow here. It spirals. If you step into the center, you'll see everything. But at what cost? I slammed the journal shut, but the question lingered, coiling around my thoughts like the spiral itself. At what cost? The night felt alive. The air outside shimmered faintly, heavy with an unnatural stillness that swallowed every sound. I stood at the edge of the spiral clearing once more, Lily's journal clutched tightly in my hands. The spiral glowed faintly in the moonlight, its world pattern seemingly deeper than before, as if the earth itself had begun to fold inward. I wasn't alone. The air around me pulsed with invisible presences, their whispers weaving through the night like threads of a sinister tapestry. Every hair on my body stood on end as I scanned the clearing, my eyes catching faint movements in the shadows at the tree line. There, figures lingered, barely formed, like smudges on the fabric of reality. They were watching, waiting. I stepped forward, the weight of the journal pulling at me like a tether. The spiral seemed to respond to my presence, the grass swaying outward in concentric circles. Each step felt heavier, the ground softer beneath my boots, as though the earth itself was reluctant to let me go. Choose, the whisper came again, low and insistent, carried on a wind that didn't stir the trees. What do you want? I called out, my voice trembling. The clearing seemed to hum in response, the vibrations crawling up my legs and settling in my chest. The figures at the edge of the trees grew more defined, their forms shifting like smoke solidifying into flesh. I recognized their faces now, faces I'd seen in photographs, in Lily's journal, in the faint recollections of family stories whispered at reunions. Elias was among them, his eyes hollow and pleading. "Help us," he whispered, his voice like a sigh carried by the wind. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "How?" The journal slipped from my grasp, its pages flipping wildly as though caught in a phantom gust. The words on the exposed pages glowed faintly, their meaning sharp and undeniable. "Step inside." I hesitated, my foot hovering over the edge of the spiral. The air felt different here, denser, colder, charged with a force I couldn't name. The figures moved closer, their forms flickering like candlelight, their eyes fixed on me with a mix of hope and desperation. "Time is broken here," one of them said, their voice layered with echoes. "We are fragments, caught in the spiral, you must see." I stepped forward. The moment my foot touched the center of the spiral, the world unraveled. The clearing dissolved, replaced by an endless expanse of swirling light and shadow. I was weightless, suspended in a vortex of spirals that stretched infinitely in every direction. The figures surrounded me, their forms clearer now, their voices a unified chorus. "Every choice is a thread," they said. "Every thread is bound to the spiral. Your family has been its anchor for centuries. One by one, we are drawn back, unable to escape its pull." I wanted to scream, to run, but there was no ground beneath me, no air to carry sound. The vortex pulsed with life, each turn of the spiral revealing glimpses of moments long past. My grandfather hiking into the woods, Lily writing furiously in her journal, a faceless ancestor standing at the edge of the clearing, staring into its depths. "Why us?" I asked, the words leaving my lips as a faint echo. "The spiral feeds," the voices replied. "It grows stronger with each life it consumes, each soul it binds. But the choice is always yours." The spirals tightened around me, their pull inexorable. My mind was flooded with fragments of understanding. The spiral clearing was not a place but a force, a loop in time and space that sought to sustain itself by ensnaring those it touched. "You can break it," the voices said, their tone both hopeful and mournful. "But only by becoming its center. The loop must hold, or it will collapse, and everything it touches will unravel." The realization struck me like a physical blow. To end the loop, someone had to take the spiral's place, to anchor it, to hold the threads of its existence together. Lily's final words echoed in my mind. At what cost? I closed my eyes, the weight of the decision crushing me. When I opened them, I was standing at the edge of the clearing once more, the spiral silent and still. The figures were gone, their presence a faint memory, and the journal lay at my feet, its pages blank. The pull was gone. But deep inside, I knew the spiral wasn't finished. It never would be. The clearing's silence was not an end, but a pause, a breath between cycles. I had stepped away this time, but the loop remained, unbroken and eternal, waiting for its next thread. And as I turned to leave, the faint whisper of my name followed me on the wind, a reminder that the spiral always calls.